Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into a world actually you've asked us to explore, the Science of Identity Foundation.
Okay.
It's this religious movement that's been generating, well, a lot of buzz, honestly.
Yeah.
And some pretty serious questions, too.
Yes, from what you've shared with me, there's quite a bit of intrigue surrounding this organization. We have articles, court records, even a letter written in Polish.
Oh, wow.
And a connection to a prominent political figure.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating puzzle.
It really is.
And we're here to help you put the pieces together.
Okay, let's unpack this. First things first.
Okay.
Who is Chris Butler? I mean, he's also known as Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa.
Right.
Jagat Guru.
Uh-huh.
The man has a lot of names.
Quite a collection indeed. What's interesting is how his journey began. Picture Hawaii in the 1960s.
Okay.
Surfing, yoga, a sense of spiritual seeking in the air.
Right.
Butler emerges as this charismatic figure attracting followers in paradise. He starts teaching a form of yoga rooted in Hinduism, and people are drawn to his message.
It sounds like the perfect setting for a spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
But then things get a little more complicated with his involvement in the Hare Krishna movement. ISKCon.
Right.
For those who might not be familiar, ISKCon is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, that are known as the Hare Krishnas.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's initiated, given the name Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa,
Wow.
and rises quickly within the movement.
Okay.
But, and this is where it gets really interesting, not everyone was on board with his interpretation of the teachings.
You're referring to that letter in Polish we have.
Exactly. This wasn't just some casual critique.
Right.
It came from a concerned devotee within ISKCon.
Okay.
They were worried that Butler's teachings were diverging from traditional Gaudiya Vaishnava principles.
Okay.
And to understand the significance of that, we need to delve a little deeper into Gaudiya Vaishnavism itself.
That's a mouthful. But it sounds important. Give us the breakdown.
Essentially, Gaudiya Vaishnavism is a specific branch of Hinduism that emphasizes devotion to Krishna. It's based on the teachings of Czaitanii Mahaprabhu, a 16th century Indian saint.
Okay.
Now, what's crucial here is that Gaudiya Vaishnavism has a very structured system of beliefs and practices. There's a strong emphasis on scriptural authority and the lineage of gurus passing down the teachings.
So this letter was essentially saying that Butler was going off script.
Precisely. The letter suggests that Butler's teachings were placing more emphasis on his own interpretations and potentially downplaying the importance of traditional scriptural authority. And this wasn't just a minor theological squabble.
Right.
It raised concerns about the direction Butler was taking his followers.
So how did this all lead to the Science of Identity Foundation? Was it a direct offshoot of ISKCon?
Not exactly. Butler had already formed his own group,
Okay.
the Krishna Yoga community, before this letter surfaced. But it's interesting to consider whether this internal criticism within ISKCon played a role in his eventual separation and the formation of the Science of Identity Foundation.
It makes you wonder if he was already moving away from those traditional teachings and establishing his own system of beliefs.
Right.
And speaking of the Science of Identity Foundation, the sources you provided mention some unusual recruitment methods.
Okay.
There's talk of meditation centers with generic names.
Right.
Almost hiding the connection to Butler and his teachings. Why the secrecy?
That's a great question, and it leads us to one of the key elements of this deep dive: control within the Science of Identity Foundation. There's a rigid hierarchy. You have disciples, senior disciples, students, new people.
Wow.
It seems that information, especially access to Butler himself, is carefully controlled and disseminated based on one's position within the structure.
So you're saying that not everyone gets the full picture right away?
That seems to be the case. Now, whether this is intentional secrecy or simply a way to guide newcomers gradually is debatable. But it certainly raises questions about transparency and the potential for manipulation.
And then there were the accusations of cult-like behavior. We have some pretty shocking quotes attributed to Butler from former members. There's talk of $1,000 fines for seemingly minor infractions, complaints about the food, despite having numerous kitchen servants, and constant references to VD as the ultimate authority.
Oh, yes, VD. That would be Vaishnava Dasi, Butler's wife.
Okay.
And you've hit on a crucial point. The level of devotion demanded within the Science of Identity Foundation appears to be absolute, extending not only to Butler but also to his wife.
Right.
And those quotes you mentioned, particularly the ones about fines and food, suggest a level of control that goes beyond typical spiritual guidance. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Science of Identity Foundation.
I have to admit, I'm still processing everything we've uncovered so far. This idea of a rigid hierarchy, the potential for manipulation, the shocking quotes from former members.
Yeah.
It's unsettling, to say the least.
It's certainly a lot to take in, and we're just scratching the surface.
Right.
But before we delve further, let's take a moment to address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
The allegations of cult-like behavior.
Right. This is where things get really tricky.
Yeah.
The word cult gets thrown around a lot, and it's often loaded with negative connotations.
Right.
But when we look at the characteristics commonly associated with cults, things like charismatic leadership, isolation from outside influences, rigid doctrine, and financial exploitation, it's hard to ignore the parallels we're seeing with the Science of Identity Foundation.
Exactly. And to understand the potential impact of these dynamics, we need to hear the stories of those who have experienced it firsthand.
Right.
The former members.
Of course.
You provided us with some accounts that are truly heartbreaking.
Yes. The stories from former members who attended SIF-run schools are particularly disturbing.
Yeah.
They describe being taught to worship Butler and his wife as divine figures, being exposed to graphic and homophobic content in their education, and even experiencing trauma as a result of the environment they were raised in.
These accounts highlight the profound impact that this kind of indoctrination can have on young minds.
Yeah.
Imagine being told from a young age that a particular individual is not only your spiritual guide, but also a divine being deserving of absolute obedience.
Right.
It can create a psychological dependence that makes it incredibly difficult to question authority or think critically.
And then there's the exposure to graphic and homophobic content.
Right.
Some former members recall being shown videos of violent acts and disturbing images, all while being told that homosexuality is a perversion.
Wow.
It's hard to fathom how this kind of education could be considered healthy or beneficial for children.
It certainly raises serious ethical concerns about the well-being of those raised within this system.
Yeah.
It goes beyond simply teaching a different set of values.
Right.
It suggests a deliberate attempt to instill fear and prejudice, which can have lasting consequences on an individual's development.
And some of these former members describe the long-term effects of this upbringing.
Yeah.
Feelings of isolation, guilt, and even post-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, wow.
It's clear that the impact of this environment can be profound and long-lasting.
It's a stark reminder that the search for spiritual enlightenment can sometimes lead to dark and unexpected places.
Yeah.
Particularly when individuals are vulnerable and seeking guidance.
Now, amidst all of this, we have the Gabbard family.
Right.
Mike, Carol, and Tulsi, all involved with the Science of Identity Foundation. And their political careers add a fascinating layer to this story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mike Gabbard, a former state senator in Hawaii, has been very outspoken about his socially conservative views, particularly on LGBTQ+ issues.
Right.
His stances align closely with Butler's teachings,
Yeah.
which raises questions about the influence of those teachings on his political career.
It's hard to ignore that connection, especially when you consider how actively Mike Gabbard has campaigned against LGBTQ+ rights.
Right.
It suggests that Butler's teachings may have played a significant role in shaping his political ideology. But what about Tulsi Gabbard? She's taken a much more moderate stance on LGBTQ+ rights, even expressing support for same-sex marriage. How do we reconcile that with her continued allegiance to Butler as her guru dev?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It seems Tulsi Gabbard is navigating a delicate balance between her spiritual allegiance and her political ambitions.
Right.
On the one hand, she's publicly distanced herself from some of Butler's more controversial teachings. On the other hand, she still acknowledges him as her spiritual guide, which suggests a level of influence that can't be easily dismissed.
So she's essentially trying to appeal to a broader audience while maintaining her connection to a figure whose teachings have been criticized as homophobic and intolerant.
Precisely. And that tension is something to keep in mind as we examine her political career and actions.
Yeah.
It's possible that she's genuinely evolved in her views, but it's also possible that she's strategically distancing herself from Butler's more controversial stances to maintain a broader appeal.
Right.
Only time will tell how this dynamic will play out in her future endeavors.
Okay, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the down-to-earth connection.
Okay.
Remember, this is the popular vegetarian grocery chain in Hawaii,
right,
owned by the QI Group.
Mm-hmm.
And the QI Group has a rather controversial history in the world of multi-level marketing, or MLM for short.
Yes, the down-to-earth connection.
Yeah.
This is where things get particularly tangled. For those who might not be familiar with MLMs, they're business models that rely on a network of independent distributors to sell products. And while some MLMs are legitimate businesses, others can easily cross the line into pyramid schemes where recruitment becomes the primary focus, and financial gains are based on recruiting new members rather than selling actual products.
And the QI Group has been accused of running just such a pyramid scheme. There are allegations of recruitment-focused strategies, misleading promises of wealth, and even legal action in various countries.
Oh, wow.
It's not a pretty picture.
No, it's not. And the fact that one of the co-founders of the QI Group, Joseph Bismarck, is a longtime devotee of Butler, adds another layer of complexity to this whole story. It raises serious questions about the potential for conflict of interest and the entanglement of personal beliefs with business practices.
So we have this potentially exploitative business model tied to a religious movement that demands absolute obedience and may be exerting financial pressure on its members. And all of this is connected to a popular grocery chain that many people probably see as a harmless health food store.
A lot to wrap your head around.
It certainly highlights the importance of looking beyond the surface, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Things aren't always as they appear.
Right.
And sometimes the truth lies buried beneath layers of complexity and seemingly unrelated connections.
It's like peeling back an onion, and each layer reveals something more pungent and thought-provoking.
Exactly. And as we continue our deep dive, we'll keep peeling back those layers, exploring the connections and searching for answers.
But before we go any further, I think it's important to acknowledge the weight of what we've uncovered so far. We're talking about allegations of manipulation, financial exploitation, and potential harm to individuals. This isn't just some abstract intellectual exercise. It's a story about real people's lives.
You're absolutely right. And we need to approach this topic with sensitivity, recognizing the potential for harm that has been inflicted. But we also have a responsibility to continue digging, to uncover the truth, and to hold those responsible accountable. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do in part 3 of our deep dive into the Science of Identity Foundation. We'll examine the financial intricacies of this organization, delve deeper into the political connections, and explore the lasting impact on those who have been involved.
Great.
So be sure to join us for the final chapter of this intriguing and unsettling story. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Science of Identity Foundation.
We've covered a lot of ground so far, from the charismatic beginnings of Chris Butler to the disturbing allegations of cult-like behavior and the complex web of political and financial connections.
It's a story that's full of twists and turns, and we're now at a point where we need to examine the implications of what we've uncovered.
Right. We've seen how money seems to play a central role in this whole saga. From the claims of financial control within the Science of Identity Foundation to the potential pyramid scheme of the QI Group and those questionable campaign contributions. It's clear that there's a lot of money flowing around. And not always in transparent ways.
And it makes you wonder about the motivations behind it all. Is this truly about spiritual enlightenment and helping people find their path? Or is there something more self-serving at play?
That's the question that lingers, isn't it?
It really is.
When we look at the evidence to the luxurious lifestyle of Butler, the pressure on members to contribute financially, the intricate web of connections between the QI Group, Down to Earth, and the Science of Identity Foundation. It's hard to ignore the possibility that financial gain is a significant driving force.
It's almost as if the lines between spiritual devotion, political ambition, and financial enrichment have become blurred beyond recognition.
Exactly, and that blurring raises serious ethical questions. When a religious leader also controls a business empire and exerts significant political influence, it creates a potential for abuse of power that can't be overlooked.
And we can't forget about the political dimension of this story. The Gabbard family's involvement adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Absolutely. Mike Gabbard's alignment with Butler's teachings on social issues is undeniable. And while Tulsi has distanced herself from some of those more extreme views, Her continued allegiance to Butler as her guru dev raises questions about the extent to which his influence might be shaping her political decisions.
It's a delicate dance she's performing, trying to appeal to a broad audience while maintaining her connection to a figure whose teachings have been widely criticized.
And it's a dance that many politicians throughout history have attempted, trying to balance their personal beliefs with the demands of public office.
Right.
It's a reminder that power, whether spiritual, political, or financial, can be intoxicating and can easily lead to compromises and contradictions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Science of Identity Foundation, what are we left with? What's the takeaway for our listener?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that critical thinking is paramount.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to matters of faith and ideology. It's crucial to question authority, examine the evidence, and be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers or demands unquestioning obedience.
And as we've seen in this case, it's also essential to look beyond the surface.
Right.
To follow the money and to consider the potential for hidden agendas.
The Science of Identity Foundation presents itself as a path to spiritual enlightenment.
Right.
But as we've explored, there's a lot more to the story than meets the eye.
Yeah.
There are allegations of manipulation, financial exploitation, and a web of connections that raises serious ethical questions.
Ultimately, it's up to each individual to decide what they make of this information. But we hope that this deep dive has provided you with the tools and insights you need to form your own informed opinions.
Remember, this is just the beginning of your exploration. There's always more to uncover, more to learn, and more to question. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop seeking the truth.
Thanks for joining us.